All right, we are back, ladies and gentlemen. We will see. Wow, it is flying up. There's a lot of you people here. What's shaking, everybody? Welcome in. I think this is our first comment we've ever gotten on Twitter. Somebody who pays for X. Good for you, Jameson. Welcome into the show. I can't spell my name right, apparently, on the title. I spell Brennan, so I feel like that.
I think you called me Brog earlier today. So. I was kind of wondering who that was, but
yeah, who is this Brog character? So,
Lord.
No, right on. So, well, hell of a day today. That was a hell of a game. The big one.
59 times more drama than we had last night.
Yes.
Put it mildly.
Yes. And obviously we covered the Jacks game. We will talk about the NDSU Montana game as well. But the Jacks game, I don't know about you, Borg, because obviously, like, there's the only thing you can bring up from the Jacks game is just how incredibly dominant they were. I mean, I think we've only seen the team truly that locked in one other time this year, and that was down at USD in Vermilion for that game. I don't know if they were that locked in prior to this game, but the electricity in that stadium, and I know Montana fans are going to jump in and, it's the full. I genuinely couldn't give two shits what you guys think about that. But the electricity in that stadium, I can't remember that much buzz. There was so much buzz that when the Jacks were on offense and people are being quiet, but just the general like buzz in the stadium was loud. Not so loud that it was going to bother the team, but it was loud. I don't know. Did you notice that at all? You're down on the field during the game, so I don't know if you noticed anything like that.
Yeah, I don't know if it was quite. I still don't know if it was quite Montana State earlier this year. That was, but to me, that was probably second best. I mean, to me this year, I think it's funny that we've had now two games where I can genuinely say I think the atmosphere is probably better than the Dakota Marker game. Montana State under the lights this year, and this game, even though it wasn't a sellout, the place just had a different energy, a different vibe. To your point about the complete thing, we were talking, and if you haven't, by the way, visited, folks, we were the only station going live. Of course, it helps to have a 9:00 show too, but we had like 20 minutes of live coverage last night, talking with guys, talking with players. So check out the Dakota News site. I'll give us a little plug there. All that's up, and I'm actually adding another thing here as we speak, just talking with guys. But yeah, I think Zach Hines told us in our live interview when we were talking with him in the 10:00 sports that the most complete game he could remember was the Arkansas Pine Bluff game where they scored 90. That was a SWAC. I think that's a SWAC team, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So, although Albany didn't really play much better than a SWAC team, but they are better than a SWAC team, a lower level SWAC team. So, that was, like I said, I think Montana State to me really set the standard for just an crowd noise. But man, I love those under the lights games. They're a little tougher from a media standpoint to cover for having to shoot the game because they butt up right into our show. But there is something special about being under the lights, and that crowd, it just had different energy. And the players, I think they know there's still the one big one ahead. But just knowing this was the last ride for the seniors at home, guys who've been here for 6 years in some cases, and you never know too. I mean, there's other guys. We hope all the guys who could be back next year are back. But if this team wins another national title, you do have to wonder if there could be guys who could go in the portal. I'm not saying I know anything, or it's just you never know. In this era with NIL, you just never know. I hope not. I hope everybody who can come back next year comes back. Mark Gronowski could become the all-time winningest quarterback in FCS at this pace, I believe. Yep. But you knew this is easily the best senior class they've ever had. It was their final game. So many guys who've been playing high school Pop Warner football in this state. The emotion was there. I think they rose to it. They were also a little salty last week after not playing a great Villanova game, and I think they wanted to. And they'd heard a lot. Not that anybody was really pumping Albany's. I think if this had been Idaho, maybe there would have been a little more. Would have been a little interest. There might have been more distraction a little bit with that if it had been Eck. and you know what their offense, but nobody was really, I think, pumping Idaho too much or Albany too much. I did watch a little bit of Albany's some coverage out there because we traded with the station for some sound and then some video. Their quarterback and running back were kind of like, oh, yeah, we're going to go shock the world. And I don't know if he really meant it or not, so I never really shared it and didn't really do the whole bulletin board thing. What are they going to say? We're going to go get our ass kicked and, but we're happy we had a great season. I think it was eye-opening for them. I genuinely saw something at the end of the game. I think if you guys noticed, maybe we're just paying attention to SDSU, I wouldn't be shocked. Okay, MPP, whatever. I didn't go to either school, so I got no dog in the fight. It'd be best thing that would happen for me is if they both made the national championship because I win because we make more money off that. But either way, this is pretty damn fun.
Right. So
I think the point I was making is if you saw, I think Gattuso kept them. They all huddled about the 20-yard line. They were watching everything SDSU was doing. They were watching the celebration. I didn't hear what he was saying, but you get the sense he was saying kind of look at that. That's what this looks like. That's what we want. Most other teams I've seen, I think Montana State, they just went to the locker room. Now, granted, it was, sub-zero last year.
Right.
I don't remember Delaware, no, we were in the COVID year in 21, so maybe I don't remember Delaware hanging out. I thought that was kind of interesting move on their part. I think that it was eye-opening for them, and the coach admitted as much afterward that we've seen that a few times from teams that have come in here. We saw it from Montana State a year ago when they got trounced. I think it's eye-opening when you see what it is. Hey, we got Stone on here. Welcome.
Yeah, the man and only Stone Labanowitz on here. So
yeah, it was just, and then of course you had the mist coming in later. I don't think I've ever been to a game here where I've seen mist. For a minute, I'm like, if you were in the fall or the September, you'd think it was maybe tailgates or smoke coming in from grills or maybe fireworks. Right. It's like it's mist. I'm like, this is just like the scene at the celebration. It was just like a movie. It was like a movie or something out of that. For baseball, it's the natural, but goodness, it was just. It was just they played just about a perfect game. I can't, other than the first play where they hit the 27-yard pass play, I can't think of anything that went wrong for it. And a blocked field goal. That's about all that went wrong for SDSU last night.
Right. And if you look at it, 5.3 yards per pass was allowed. Like, holy hell. And that's against a team with some good receivers that have good, they like throwing it down the field. And they just couldn't do it in a lot of those passing yards that they did rack up with the 232, which is still below the average that we give up. A lot of those yards were because most of the second half, the defense kind of just sat back and said, we're not letting you get over the top. We're not giving you any plays that are going to let you get some excitement and feel like you're going to come back. You're going to have to earn every inch. And then all those drives stalled out in the red zone because it's just what happened. They just stalled out once the defense was able to compress and not worry about them going over their heads. It was kind of wrapped up after that. You could tell that Albany was in trouble when the first drive, the offensive line is just opening holes and Mark was on. And then Jaden Yonke, that dude, when did he turn into Randy Moss in his prime? Like the two catches he made in the first half were insane. Dude's all over him, just draped all over him. And that was nuts. Stone asked, what would Mark's other options be besides coming back? He could transfer, technically he could go to the NFL.
He's got very
2
close.
years left, technically.
He's very close to his brother, who's a Special Olympian. He's got a big situation with his family. Maybe, Northwestern, Illinois. You telling me they wouldn't maybe? I think I've seen some stories. There was Big Ten interest in him, but nobody was going to offer him a scholarship coming out of school. So, it's one of those things. If Northwestern, Illinois, and now Northwestern is better. They won 7 games. It wouldn't be quite if Northwestern one win comes to you a year ago and says, then I wouldn't dare. But again, I don't know. I don't think it's likely, but you have to think eventually the transfer portal is going to come. It's just it's NIL. But yeah, Northwestern Illinois is home state. If he could move closer, I don't think any of those MAC programs are going to really be enough to poach him. But at the same time, the other thing you have to say is if you're also looking to get to the NFL, you probably have just as good a shot to do it in Brookings as you do anywhere else. I don't think going to Northwestern or now if it's a family thing, then that may be just tugging at the heartstrings. That could be a possibility. Right. But if it's am I going to get to the pros? I don't know if playing at Illinois or Northwestern is really going to, if you like the world on fire, maybe, but the risks is the same thing in basketball. The risks are huge if you go, if that's your goal, because if you're just another dude at a 6-5 win Illinois or Northwestern team, you're probably not getting noticed. But at least if you're at the FCS with maybe the best team in the country, again, although we know SDSU is going to look a lot different next year, we still think they're going to be pretty good. You can easily get to the pros. I mean, there's other guys too. I wonder about Amar. I've always wondered, what Amar Johnson's doing. There's just other guys, and they could potentially have 2 rings. I mean, how much more do some of these guys have to accomplish here? But as Jimmy has said, and I don't think it's all talk. I think there is more to this program than just the wins. I think it's one difference that's maybe coming in a little more with SDSU and NDSU. I think I've heard this from people. Like, I've heard the NDSU, they like to say they recruit at the level of a MAC or a Mountain West or like those kind of low-level FBS comp. That's the level, that's the standard. I've heard that from media, fans up there or whatever. And obviously, I know there was that feature Zimmer had just recently, which he says, there's a surprising number of the SDSU guys were just walk-ons. Like, they weren't recruited by anybody.
Oh, yeah.
We've seen, I mean, and that's been going on for a long time. So they're obviously very big on player development, but I think sometimes when you're that way, that maybe engenders a little more loyalty to your program. And obviously a lot of these guys are in state too, which helps. Right. When you're, if you're at NDSU and you're being told how great you are and your coach is pumping the tires about the recruiting ratings, you get good right away. Then all of a sudden, maybe you do get a wandering eye as soon as people start calling. But, if this coach at SDSU who developed you from the start, who said, we know you're a walk-on, but we believe in you. We're gonna build you up. It's probably a little tougher to leave unless it's like, look at Tucker Kraft. He had Alabama coming after him. Like, if a dude like Tucker Kraft can say no to Alabama, like that would be the thing to me. Like, if I were a hometown kid and I were a walk-on, and it would be pretty tough for me to leave. But if the University of Alabama comes to me, I would have a really tough time saying no to that. And he did. He won a national title. He's a 3rd-round draft pick. He's going to have a pretty decent NFL career, maybe even a great one if they ever use him properly.
They're starting to use him more now. And enough to the point that they actually had I don't know if you saw it, they had a feature on him online on their Rocks Minute that they do with Larry McCarron, which to me is crazy. I grew up listening to that man, so that's really cool to see. And they're kind of pushing for him for the Pro Bowl. I don't think he'll get that. But I don't want to get too much into transfer portal stuff for me. Like, we'll worry about that. I know the guys are
let NDSU worry about that. That's their problem as of tomorrow morning.
And we'll get into that later. The only thing I can say is eventually the transfer portal comes for us all. No matter what
we've seen it enough in basketball. We've seen it enough in basket. We've seen, we had it on our network tonight. I saw Baylor Shireman going off against Alabama for Creighton. I mean, how great would it be to see him in an SDS uniform right now? You telling me that team wouldn't have been in another NCAA tournament by now? And maybe, who knows? I mean, it's the way it is. It's the world right now.
But on this game, just the one last thing that I just marvel at, I mean, this defense, Jesus, they've given up
no All-Americans
points. No All-Americans across the board.
Not good enough. Not good enough.
It's going to be crazy. No, we're not talking Grizz Bison because tough shit. This is a Jackrabbit show. Figure it out.
Not yet. We'll talk it later. We'll
get there, but this is. I don't know if you notice. We're a Jack show and we cover other stuff, but we're going to lead with the Jack stuff. So you just wait at the back of the bus for us to finish here. This defense, they've allowed 12 points. And granted, it's not, it doesn't have the name cachet of playing Montana, Montana State, USD, but they didn't give up any points to USD neither at USD, and everybody was just all falling all over themselves
but three points, but
right,
still better than the none that the other two teams we had here scored. I mean,
right,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, I mean, God, it's insane, and they just don't get enough love. I think, because they're so overshadowed by the firepower and the star power on the offense, and that's nobody's fault. But man, they were screaming around the field. The interceptions, that interception by, I think it was Dallas Beanham, the over the shoulder catch. Are you kidding me?
I think that might have been I think that was Gales. Beanham had one along the
Gales. Yep,
Beanham had one along the sideline that was good, and Tucker.
Yeah,
excuse me, I got a little bit
Tucker
of
Large had one.
To me, that Tucker Large one was one of the play. I mean, you could argue he had 2 plays of the game, because like you, and I tweeted this when I was following it. After that first drive, I immediately said, "I'll leave you to that one." After that first drive, I had the same thought as you, and I saw you up in the stands as well. I think I even got you one of my pictures. Yeah, I would have shot you, but I have a camera because I'm not allowed to shoot that stuff. Thank you, ESPN. I said after that first drive, for the same reason you did. Like, we're going to find out if this game's going to be competitive on this very next drive, because obviously it looked like, and I know they had come back the week before against Idaho, but we also know Idaho didn't have the same, they're not nearly where Eck wants them to be, especially on the lines. So that's a much different deal. But I right away, I'm like, okay, if they're going to have any shot, they need to go score, or this is going to get out of hand fast. And right away, you hit a 27-yard pass down the sideline. That receiver, I can't remember his name. He's number 1. That was their best receiver. He's good. I mean, that's genuinely
that dude really was something to try to tackle. Like, he had some wiggle, and the amount of guys that got hands on him and just fell off was nuts.
Yeah. Julian Hicks. I mean, he was a tremendous player. I think they got another first down. I mean, they were moving the foot. It's like, if they at least get a field goal, you're feeling somewhat good about yourselves at that point. And then, you'll see what happens. They get the big play. They got a 3rd and 1. They get down to the SDSU 38. And then on the 3rd and 9, Large picks off that pass. And to me, that might as well have been the ball game. I mean, it really basically might as well have, because SDSU then just goes right down the field, scores. And it's just, at that point, the snowball's going downhill, and you're not stopping it. I mean, it was just defensively. Yeah. I mean, this group is peaking at the right time, the same way they did a year ago. Montana's going to present a few challenges, namely that Bergen kid. I don't know if they've seen a player. I don't know if they've seen a player like this in the regular season this year. Hicks is maybe as close as but I don't know if they've seen a player like this. But I also know that in the post game too, SDSU mentioned, they got kind of sick and tired of hearing about how good Albany's defense was. So, I think it maybe returned the favor a little bit. And, of course, I think they're also looking for anything they can find to pump themselves up.
I'm telling you, if you're, as a Jacks fan, I wanted Montana, because Montana's going to provide it.
Oh yeah,
they are, just as the fan base and everything. I know I've got a feeling that and we could probably, because there's not a whole lot from that last game to get into, but and we got the 2 other shows that will.
Oh yeah, and I do want to shout out again the crowd. I thought it was
awesome.
Again, I've been, like I said, I just think that I know people will continue to. I even had an SDSU fan or two say that, although it was a guy who wasn't even there, which I found ironic. But I'll just say again, people got to realize, whenever that Fargo, Missoula, Bozeman compare, they have 2 to 10 times as much population within their town as Brookings. So they can more easily, when you have to rely on a traveling population, it's never as easy. There's a lot of factors. And we know some people still, puss out because of the weather. That's just going to be a thing. But I think something else I made a point, and I went a little back and forth with Andre Fields on this. And what we forget is, like, Montana, NDSU, Montana State, they've had long histories of playoff success, championship. I mean, it's decades. SDSU never had that. USD, aside from a year or two, never had that. SDSU is building that. This is their first decade of consistent playoff success. what is this going to look like in 10 years if they keep having this success? Now, I think this whole division is going to look a lot different in 10 years, as we've talked about. But 10 years from now, this could, if this becomes ingrained the way it has up there, absolutely they could start getting bigger playoff crowds.
Yes.
It's one of those things where it's going to take time for that to happen. I've said it's one of those things too. It's like it's pretty easy to plan your schedule when the schedule's already set. There's just a lot of things as an adult now. I've learned this too. I mean, it's like, sometimes you can't just get off of work. It's, you can't take the whole family if you're traveling a couple hours away and gas is expensive. I know the tickets are actually cheaper, which helps, but
but I know you can get into anything for $10.
That helps. That helps in the playoffs and the SDH. And obviously they did a lot to keep the students in. If the students had been here, that place would have had another 2,000 or 3,000 probably.
Yep.
But I think they're moving in the right direction with the crowds. We'll see what happens next year and the years to come. Obviously, this group, this senior class, had a very special connection. But yeah, you're right. We are going to hear a little more. We're going to hear from the Grizz people because they can fill 25,000. But again, helps that they're in Missoula where they have 60-some thousand, and it's been something that for decades for them has been a thing. This is becoming a thing at South Dakota State. And if it continues to be a thing, let's check back in another decade or so and see where it's at. So, and yeah, I just, again, I think phenomenal job from everybody out there. It was just, another great celebration. The fiddle song. I mean, that was, that was almost better than. The only thing I wish is that maybe it would have been Montana State this year. I wish we could have had this. Just because I wish it could have been we could have had the Montana State weather last year, because I think Montana State last year could have gotten this kind of crowd, or 15,000 if it hadn't been below zero and there'd been like an ice storm the day before. Because man, even though that game was also a blowout, God, that's like the only thing. I just wish it'd been a little bit better opponent with a little more of a. Because I feel like we kind of knew this was coming. And it would have been fun if it would have been Eck, but I've said this. I think anybody short of Alabama or Georgia, unless it was an SEC team coming in here, I don't think anybody was beating SDSU last night.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the attendance and all the stuff you said, it's a culture thing. It's building. You go back 5 years ago, the Dana at the end of the season would have 6,000 fans in it when it was cold. It's grown into that. I'm really quick to defend myself here. Our good buddy Kevin out in Montana there, of SCS Nation Radio, says Randy Moss, LOL. I'm not saying he is Randy Moss. I was saying for a half, he pulled some shit and it was impressive. But anyways, it's building a culture. We had never had more than one sellout ever, and then we had 4 in a year. And this is probably the extent of how much I'm going to talk about the crowd, because
it's a dead horse that's gonna probably be beaten by Grizzly people, and we've beaten it with we've gone back and forth with USD people, and it is what it is.
Well, for every fan that they have for every fan, they almost have a year without a title for every fan that was in that stadium. So for every 1,000 fans. So
yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder how it's taken. It makes you wonder how it's taken. Because another reason I've been looking for Montana. I've wanted this matchup with Montana is I did work there briefly, for about a half a year. I thought I was going to be there a lot longer, but then I got a call to go somewhere else, and I took it. I kind of wish I had stayed longer because it's beautiful out there, but I wasn't making very much, so I kind of had to. Probably wouldn't have been able to last out there very long because it's expensive to live out there if you're not making much. But
Juice Master, I don't know if 2 overtime games qualifies as clown stomping through the bracket. I believe that is called survive and advance.
Yeah, they could have lost to Furman too. So I mean, and somebody asked me too what I thought of Furman. Yeah, I think this speaks well. I think this spoke well of Furman. I mean, I had my doubts about them. I said this. I almost want to say this, but I thought it would have been piling on. So for once, I actually didn't and chose the classy route. People were like asking, well, what was the difference in that game? And I wanted a week ago. And I think they said it was Bergen. And my thing was, no, the difference was you lost to a 1-9 team. If you'd won that game, you would have been home for that quarterfinal. Right. And you probably, maybe, who knows who you would have been playing. Maybe would have been playing USD. It might have been, USD might have been bumped below them. We don't know. But I mean, it's one of those things where if they had that chance to be at home in the quarterfinal, we know the odds for teams at home go up when you're in that, and that's probably the best SoCon team that they've had since the league got gutted a decade ago. But, there's no moral victories. There's no moral victories. You had your shot. As tough as it is to come up short like that, hopefully they can come back. Because I do want to see more teams. I want to see some Eastern teams. Somebody brought this up to me on Twitter last night. There's got to be some Eastern teams, some Southern teams that start to rise up. Otherwise, subdivision can't just last on the Montanas and the Dakotas and some teams in the Valley. It's got to have a little more bite outside of it to the east and into the south. And but yeah, I think the streak still goes on for the SoCon. They haven't gotten to the semifinals, and they can't keep acting like, well, we just keep getting sent to Fargo. You keep coming up short one way or the other, and if it's not in the playoffs because you don't win the games you have to win to get you better seeding. But I think they could have. I think part of it was too, so many people dismissed them, especially up in Fargo, because I remember I heard some comments up there like, "Oh, Furman played them close. NDSU was going to kill those guys." Mm-hmm. That was actually, I heard that comment Friday night. It's like, boy, if and whoever wins between USD and NDSU is going to kill them. I'm like, one of the things we kind of forget, and this tends to happen, we saw it with SDSU this year and last year. Teams tend to kind of I don't want to say lay an egg, but they don't necessarily play their best in the quarterfinal. There seems to be like one game where they maybe have their mulligan game and they don't play their best. And everybody's like, oh, is this team really as good as we think? Maybe they're not as good. Maybe they're going to lose, and we thought that with Montana last week. I'm sure people were saying that with South Dakota State last week against Villanova, despite the fact it was like in a gale force wind, and then usually when those things happen, that team, if they're truly as good as we think they are, comes back the next week and just blows the doors off people. Or comes back and plays extremely well. And obviously that happened with SDSU the last 2 years, this year, and then, the Holy Cross game a year ago, which I brought up a lot. What happens next week? Montana State's coming in here. Oh, they're coming in with all this momentum. They just killed William and Mary. How are the Jacks going to handle this team? Oh, yeah, how's that feel? You're going back down with a, 31-point butt whooping, and then this game, obviously. And then Montana, obviously, they didn't boat race NDSU, but they matched up with NDSU. And yes, obviously, the Bison didn't help themselves with some play calls, but you can't, it's just people, we all get too wrapped up sometimes in these results and saying, oh, they didn't play well this week, they're going to suck. What does this mean for next week? Each week's a new game, and the playoffs are a different thing. And sometimes, one team comes in and plays really well. Each week is its new week. So I don't, I don't, and it, even with as we start to talk a little more about SDSU or NDSU and Montana, it's like, who knows what we now have 3 weeks in between this title game, so there's a lot of time to debate what's going to happen there. But yeah, I think
nobody overreacts quite like FCS fans in the playoffs, like ever. And that was my big pushback when everybody was taking NDSU against Montana. Yeah, Montana fans, I picked you. I chose you. So relax. I know you're a good team. But it's possible that Furman was just a pretty good team, and maybe Montana had a little bit of an attitude that they were looking by them. I honestly think if you look at the Jacks game, there was a lot of tells you saw, like when we were talking about way back when we were talking about USD when they beat NDSU. There was things you saw in that game, a dropped punt return, people lining up incorrectly, getting procedural penalties, things like that happening that were uncharacteristic, that showed you that they probably weren't locked in. And then they came out and admitted we weren't locked in. Now, SDSU didn't say they weren't locked in, but you could tell there was a whole different team that came out at halftime in that Villanova game. Montana survived through. That's all you got to do. And then NDSU comes in and everybody thought they were going to kill them, forgetting that they had just had an overtime game with Montana State to make it to the USD game. So it's one of those deals. But you look at this game.
I do kind of want to add one bit of one. There's one thing I should add a bit of appreciation on. Is we're going to talk relates to SDSU game, but also the NDSU game. Since we're going to be talking about the calls from Tyler Roll and the NDSU offensive coordinator, you got to maybe shout out Zach Lujan a little bit here. I think he took a little bit of criticism last. I think they took a little criticism last week and maybe a little deservedly so, because I don't think they threw much with the wind. I think maybe they got a little too spooked by the wind, quite honestly, because I thought Gronowski was making good throws with and against it, and it seemed like in that first quarter it just kind of seemed like it really threw him off. But that aside, I don't think Zach necessarily gets enough credit for what he does, just because he followed Jason Eck, who is just such a personality. But man, he just has his finger on the pulse of this team, and he's really still a very young assistant coach. I mean, he's a lot like Roll. He hasn't done anything outside of this program, and he just knows the buttons to push. He's not, he'll dial up some different stuff, but he's unlike Roll. And again, I like Tyler too. I knew him as a player when I worked in Fargo, but they just do the most important thing sometimes I want from a play caller is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's no need to get cute when it's working. And NDSU is they've had this going on now, and people blame it on Ince, even though he's a defensive guy. He's not the offensive coordinator. Maybe he okays these things. But it's like they've had this thing where I feel like they might have another national title right now if they wouldn't just stop doing some of the stupidest crap with a game on the line that I've ever seen. Meanwhile, here's Lujan. He just knows what to do. He's like, he doesn't get crazy. I don't see a panic in him. Our photographer, Sam Tastad, we can't shoot video of the game, but we're shooting sideline stuff. He was up in the booth and he was shooting Zach, and you saw the emotion. Like, people think, and Zach is pretty cerebral. He's pretty calm. Look at our Twitter account. We retweeted that. You see him going nuts. Like, if you think Zach is cerebral, he gets into it. That was fun. I mean, I don't think he's going to punch the glass out like was that Eck or was that Jimmy who punched the glass out in Fargo? I don't know who did it.
I don't know if it's either of those guys, but
it had to be one of them. It has to.
You'd think. I don't think it was either one. I can't remember who it was, but I don't think it was one.
They just both did I don't know. It feels like it had to be one of them, but and it's just and I also think too. I just love it for him personally because obviously his playing career here. He came here as a JUCO guy, so we never really expected him to play much. And then he comes in when Austin Sumner gets hurt, and he just an unenviable position because Sumner was set up to have this great senior year, and he really did a good job. We knew nothing about him. He came in and he kept the ship afloat and kept him in a position where they could make the playoffs. And then we come in the next year and we think he's going to be the starter, leads them to their first FBS win at Kansas. Has a rough game against NDSU and gets hurt, and then Taryn Christian comes in. And, unfortunately, nothing, no knock on Zach, but Taryn is Taryn. And, of course, later on in the year, Zach came in and relieved Taryn and won them the USD game that got them to the playoffs, where they ended up losing to Montana, ironically. But Zach's career just was kind of, he had kind of I want to say rough career, but, it's got to be tough when you had it there and just kind of, you got Wally pipped a little bit, to use an old baseball analogy. So to see him kind of getting a chance to do this, to kind of be at the controls of this and maybe have a chance to win another national title, and I'm sure his stock is going to rise if he wants to leave and get something bigger and better, quote unquote. It's pretty cool to see him have this second life as a coach and kind of get a little bit of a starring role of his own after, for whatever, be an injury and some other things. He just didn't quite have this as a player.
Yeah. The thing, I think the greatest compliment you can pay an offensive coordinator is he never tries to prove how smart he is. It feels like every offensive coordinator out there at some point is trying to prove how clever they are or how they're outsmarting the other team, because all the time you see the NFL or whatever, they're talking about, he's such a smart play caller, blah, 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 blah. I think the best play caller is one who isn't even getting commented on and the team just dominates. Like Seth Meyers says, it helps that we have an embarrassment of riches on offense. It's true. But that, in my opinion, actually makes it easier for him to screw it up and try to get too pretty and too smart. Coach Eck was a great offensive coordinator. He was awesome. He's a great head coach. We love Coach Eck here, but there was always a couple games a season, and you saw it in the Idaho game where you're like, what are you doing? Like, you don't have to prove how smart you are. We don't have to do this. And they do it all the time, and he's so good at not having that happen and sticking with what works and being smart about it. Shout out to Juice Master. That's going to come up. I'm sure that's going to be a storyline. Coach Rogers was on that team, and let me tell you, buddy, they ain't going to forget it. Here's something I want to say, because we have some fans all over that I see on the boards and on Twitter and all this stuff, just like, well, we're better than you. You should recognize that. How are you not recognize we're better? That's such an NDSU fan thing to say. Are they wrong? No, I don't think they're wrong. I think deep down, pretty much everybody knows that. But like Seth said earlier, Grizz fans should absolutely feel like they have a chance in this game. It is not impossible for them to win this game. Is SDSU going to be heavy favorites? Of course they are, but they absolutely should have every right, and they definitely should believe they can win this game. They've got great players. If for some reason the SDSU coaches will lose their mind and kick to that guy, that Bergen, like, I'm gonna have to get restrained because that'd be dumb. But
SDSU has had some. I mean, they've had an up and down year on special teams. They've had some great moments, and it's certainly. I mean, heck, you've got two really good punt returners going at it. Because Bergen, I mean, has largely overshadowed how good Tucker Large has been on that. I mean, Tucker might be the top punt returner in the nation if not for Bergen being there. But they've had some. He is a problem. I've even suggested maybe just double team him like it's basketball. Because look, it's not just the punt return. He had that play where he was getting face masked on the 2-point conversion that ends up winning the ball game. I mean, that could have been. I mean, granted, it got tipped and the guy made a hell of a catch too.
That was a stupid play call. They got lucky.
I mean, yeah, they got lucky, but still, I mean, just to even be able to compose yourself and get a decent throw off. I mean, the guy can do a number of different things. He is kind of a. I don't know, I'm not saying he's as good as this guy, but maybe a Reggie Bush light in the FCS would be a way to compare it. Devin Hester, maybe that too. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, he's a problem. I don't think McDowell looked particularly good today, but I've seen games where he's mobile. He can run around. He looked today. He didn't really look like himself. I thought he would give NDSU more problems today because you tend to see those guys. I mean, we saw with Taryn Christian back in the day. Mobile quarterbacks tend to spook NDSU, and this isn't the best bite. Although they got a lot better during the playoffs and toward the end of the season, I'll give him that. But
he looked like he wanted to run, like he was real not that he was scared, but like he was so hyper focused on throwing the ball, and it cost them time and time and time again. Instead of just taking off and getting the 5 to 10 yards he could have got, he took a sack, and one of them cost him a field goal.
Yeah, speaking of special teams, man, I talk about SDSU special teams being up and down. Good God, no one in Montana can kick a field goal or an extra point. Goodness, I mean, Montana State. This could well have been a Brawl of the Wild semifinal if the Montana State kicker can kick an extra point or a field goal. Of course, we know what happened there. They had the extra point blocked and they missed 2 field goals. Well, after that Bergen punt return, we're kind of forgetting it now, but they missed the extra point. It was a Blair Walsh shank, basically. And then they had a 40-ish yard field goal. I mean, it wasn't again, I tend to say no college field goal of 40 or more yards is a gimme, but he came up well short. I'm like, it wasn't like he pulled it. Usually I think you see a guy go right, left. Like it looked like I'm just like, how is kicking, especially at elevation, you're supposed to be able to get more distance. So it just feels, I don't know what's going on. So it's interesting. They have this unbelievable special teams weapon, yet kicking seems to be a liability for them. And maybe that's something you exploit because we've seen SDSU block some field goals this year. But yeah, I mean, goodness, Montana, you're recruit some field goal kickers. Jeez, I mean, you can't tell me that should be a place you want to kick field goals. Elevation. The ball's going to go a little farther. I know that's how it works in baseball. I think the same physics at thin air work at thin air for football. So I remember Jason Elam when he was with the Broncos back in the day used to hit 66 yarders, I think. But it's just that to me was shocking. And then McDowell, I'm looking at his numbers now. I mean, not terrible, but he didn't really 16 to 30, 160 a touchdown. But rushing wise, 12 for 17, and his long was 15. So he was mostly getting sacked. They didn't run. I mean, Eli Gilman's their other stud. He actually won the Freshman of the Year. I think the Jerry Rice Award, if I'm not mistaken, for Freshman of the Year, which should have gone to Mark Gronowski a few years ago, but whatever. Screw job. But they held him in check. He only went for 49. Although they did have he went for 49. They have another back, Osmo, who went for 4. So they did at least kind of get over 100 yards. But I just they did. NDSU definitely defensively. It seemed like they kind of had their number. I mean, the Grizz really didn't score offensively in the second half. It was just those overtime touchdowns, and they would get a drive going, but then they would give up a sack or there'd be an incompletion. And Bobby had some weird calls too. There was that 4th and 2 at midfield where he made just a really stupid call. It gave him the ball right back when you're playing great defense, and you could have pinned him inside the 10.
Yeah, there was a lot of head scratchers in this game. On their special teams, their kicking game is so poor that it almost balances out how good Junior Bergen is to make it like a B average because it's so bad. But on the flip side, their punt block, they got a hand on a punt block today. I know their kick block is good. So I say that jokingly. It's crazy though. You're right. Like my joke all playoffs has been make Big Sky teams kick field goals. Like if you do that, I watched, there was 3, 4, if you include the extra point in the Montana State game. There was another 3 or 4 by Idaho. And then there was an extra point and a missed field goal by Montana today. That's almost double digits missed kicks for one conference in the playoffs. And that's not that many games. It's crazy that happens. And like you said, they're all at elevation.
And some of them are at, the Idaho games were at a dome.
Right. Like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense. But it's it was interesting, this game to watch. There was a couple times these coaches, NDSU, people forget that NDSU prior to when they got really dominant was known for these huge play calls of fake punts or a fake kick and things like that won them games in the playoffs and won them national titles. And so when you saw that happen, it was like, oh my God, there it is. There's the NDSU of old. But then they pull that 2-point conversion, and you're like, what is that? After Montana did it, it was almost like they were trying to do anything you can do, I can do better. And NDSU, let's go back to the beginning, I guess. NDSU was rolling on offense and just killing themselves. And this is where props to Montana fans. They had like 3 false starts in one series, not a drive, one series on one play. They got 2 false starts, and then they got a false start on the punt. And that false start was actually fortunate on the punt because that was a blocked punt, and they blew the whistle dead late. But if those penalties don't happen, NDSU might have been leading 10 or 14 to nothing if those penalties don't happen, and that's a whole different game. They just kept killing themselves. It was crazy. But after that, Montana's defense really settled in, and they started giving them fits. I mean, NDSU has a good offense, and when you they only score 16 points in the game. I mean, that's crazy. That's good defense. NDSU was averaging 30 some points this season. So that was no joke. I was thinking going into this game that Montana was going to be able to hold up pretty well against NDSU's rushing attack, because to be honest, I think NDSU runs a more effective version of Montana State's offense with how they throw the ball. They're better throwing the ball downfield than Montana State is, but otherwise it's the same damn thing. In my mind, you're running quarterbacks all the time, and you run your quarterback almost more than your running backs, and there you are. I mean, Tamarick Williams only had 3 more carries than Cole Payton. Like, that's crazy. Like Zach McKinnell says, NDSU really choked in the red zone. So did Montana. Montana choked in the red zone too. I mean, McDowell holding onto the ball and getting them out of that field goal range on that drop back when he got sacked. I'm screaming at the TV, throw the damn ball. And he almost has too much faith in his escapability to extend a play and make a big play. If I was a Montana fan, I'd probably be a little bit concerned about that, possibly leading to a turnover in the national title game if he keeps doing that all the time against what is, and I know the stats aren't going to back this up, but I think SDSU has a better, more ball hawking defense than NDSU does. And I think the stats lead that way. I can have a whole explanation of that, but it has to do with the Jacks falling back into prevent defense more often by being ahead and less aggressive defensive calls and things like that.
Well, and I think they don't necessarily get a lot of sacks during the regular season. They certainly don't, at least that I've observed, they don't bring as many blitzes as NDSU does from week to week, game to game. But it seems like they really do ratchet it up in the playoffs, because it feels like in the last year, although he's been kind of quiet, I remember Cade Tervier really turned it up in the playoffs, and he had, like, last 2 years actually, he's had a big sack numbers. This year it's been Quentin Hicks, who's, in his final year is probably playing the best football we've seen from him. It seems like the pressure, maybe I don't know if they save it or they just figure, well, we're in the playoffs, might as well. What was the old line from, it was like that line from The Water Boy that they kept using with Dan Fouts. Throw it all out there now, or I can't remember what it was, but yeah, just might as well use it now. I don't know other time to use it at this point, but yeah, I mean, and they just, sometimes, I don't know, they do put more pressure defensively on people in the playoffs. I can't believe I couldn't remember that line either, but I don't know. I think maybe that pressure got to him a little more today, but again, I've seen some video of McDowell. I think he's a better quarterback than what he showed today, and I would expect a better game from him, just because I don't necessarily know that we're going to see SDSU throw as many all-out blitzes at him that NDSU will. But SDSU's secondary is pretty dang good, and that's going to be, there have been years where Montana's had some really good receivers, and maybe I'll transition to it with that. Somebody was bringing up, why don't they schedule a series with them? We can get into that in a minute, but we've seen actually USD and Montana play quite a bit over the last couple of years, and believe it or not, they've actually been willing to come out to Vermillion and play a couple games. And some of those games were actually, most of those games have actually been fairly close, which also kind of speaks to how far Montana had slipped, because USD wasn't particularly good in those years they played them. But like, they had really good receivers. I think, I'm trying to think. One guy I know went to Nebraska. I think Torre was his name. One guy went to Nebraska the next year. I think at least one's in the pros right now. I don't know they necessarily have that really tall, big, wide receiver that they kind of had in the past couple of years. But they've had really good receivers over the years. I don't know. I need to break down a little more on them, but I don't know that they necessarily have that guy, because, we saw that a couple of years ago when they played Montana State in Bozeman. The Bobcats had those big receivers that they just were throwing jump balls up to. Obviously, SDSU's gotten a lot better since that game, and that was a much different situation of being on the road and the time zone thing, which, again, very, obviously a non-seeded team does not make it to the championship game again, which NDSU was trying to do, join Youngstown. They did that a few years ago. But somebody mentioned, why doesn't I don't know if they backed out or not on that home and home, but Montana doesn't. When Hawk was the coach the first tenure, he notoriously had some awful non-conference schedules, and it was just a very different era. I mean, the playoffs back then, I don't think they actually seeded them. I think it was basically you could pretty much just buy your home games, and obviously, Missoula, they're going to win every bid for a home game. But the way when Hawk left for UNLV after 2009, that's, shortly after that is when the playoff scenarios changed, and all of a sudden now everybody's getting seeded. So now, Montana can't always count on being at home because they ended up getting seated lower at times than people. Now they have to go on the road. And now also, you have to maybe schedule a little tougher because they used to play a lot of Division II teams. Just, bring in Western Washington or Central Washington. I mean, they played Ferris State this year, who was granted defending national D2 champion, but they used to be very notorious for just some awful non-conference scheduling. They've gotten better with it, but I think they played Northern Iowa in a home and home when Northern Iowa was still pretty good. But yeah, I'm surprised. They haven't gone out. I mean, other than the time they played NDSU in that regular season opener, that was that kickoff thing in Missoula. That was 2015. And that was a special deal that the networks kind of set up. That wasn't a home and home. Of course, that was the game where they beat Carson Wentz in the week 0 thing. But then later on in the year, they got smashed in the playoffs. That was Bob Stitt's first game. That was pretty much the highlight of his tenure. But I don't think, there's, to be fair, we've said this too, how much those games can be high risk and high reward. Montana State, did it really help them that much to play SDSU this year? You could argue that was a high point.
It would have if they wouldn't have dropped other games.
But, even then, it's like you can, it's one of those things too where you can also, you lose that game, then you're potentially out in seeding. So, I mean, it's hot, but competitively, you want to play the best teams, and you want, especially if you don't have an FBS game, I think it makes more sense to play that game, which neither team did. But yeah, and in fact, as I looked at the series, and I looked this up, and I'm sure Grizz fans are going to remind him, Montana has never lost to SDSU. They're 8-0 all time, but all but one of those games have been in Missoula. I think the one that was in Brookings was like in 1950. And the last 4 games.
That's very relevant, just as a Montana fan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then the last 4 games, I need to pull this up now because it's going to make me curious. But the last 4 games have all been, and they're all spread out over different years. And again, you can never really apply this stuff because we know these games are spaced way the heck apart. Last 4 games have all been very close, and several of them South Dakota State has, quite frankly, would admittedly say they've blown. But they don't. And when you can make that much money on your home games, they don't. I can understand why they don't want to necessarily leave. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see how much Montana State and SDSU have gone back and forth with the scheduling. They've had several home and homes. You'd think Montana would maybe at some point want to schedule SDSU and NDSU, but especially knowing that, that's who you're going to face. But Bobby was not known for challenging himself much in the non-conference the first time around. And, but obviously, to be fair, they did beat Washington 2 years ago. Obviously, that was pre-Kalen DeBoer, and that's part of the reason Kalen DeBoer is there now. So, but yeah, they've never really been under him. They were never really fond of scheduling anything very challenging.
Yeah, and these Montana fans are really enjoy bringing up the 2009 game, and I don't blame them. It was 14 years ago. I would hang on to that as long as possible. I mean, the last 14 years, what else is and Montana had to hang on to? But if people were wondering why was we were saying the same thing, pull the starters in this Albany game, like, God, please pull them at halftime. If you don't think that game is in the back of Jimmy's mind in a game that's getting out of hand, and he's like, no, we're not just making sure, we're making damn sure. And when our backups are in there, we're not just running out the clock. We're still playing damn football. And if we keep running the score up on your ass, you're in the playoffs, bitch. Buckle up your seatbelt and play. That if you don't think that's his attitude after that, then you are sorely, sorely mistaken. And no, the Jackrabbit AD didn't jump. He was an assistant athletic director. It was not the actual athletic director. But that being said, yeah, I think Montana's scared to play in Brookings, which I understand. Why wouldn't they be? I wouldn't want to play there either. I'm just talking shit now to Montana fans. I got to stop it.
Well, I'll be a little more, I guess what the
professional.
Word would be, professional. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be. Yeah, I've got the series page pulled up. And the last time they played in Brookings was 1970, and they shut out the Jacks 24-0. Just for the record, they're not very good in non-con. They were not a great Division II team. We acknowledge that. But 4 of the last 5 games they played, including some Division II years, were really close. Now, everybody's going to bring up that 2009 game. One that was brought up to me when I was talking to some people up there was 1993. And this was the Division II era. And SDSU went up there, got out to something like a 20. They had a 20-point lead in the second half. And Montana ended up coming back and winning 52-48. And that was a Jackrabbit team, which I think ended up going 7-4. If they had beaten one, and that was like at the start of Montana's streak where they made 20 consecutive playoff appearances, which ended in 2010, ended the 1 year I was out there. So I got really bad news for you, Grizz fans. If I'm in Frisco, you're definitely screwed, because the 1 year I covered your team, you sucked, and that ended your long playoff streak. So, anytime I'm associated with your program, even if I'm not there, anytime I'm associated with you, you lose. You're doomed. Doomed, I tell you. So have fun with that while you sleep tonight. But no, in that 93 game, they lose 52-48. If they win that game against a 1 AA team, they go to the Division II playoffs in 93. That's in the discussion. They had several games that year where they lost like that, but you beat a 1 AA team in Division II, you're going to go to the playoffs. So that happened. 2005, when they were in the infancy of their transition, they go to Missoula and lose 7-0. I don't know if it was September 17th. I'm pulling up the box score right now. So it wasn't exactly a blizzard, but Montana scored a first quarter touchdown and somehow kept them off the board the rest of the game. But obviously SDSU must have done a bit of a number. The Jacks ran for 28 total yards in the game. The Jacks had 108 yards of total offense. If that doesn't tell you how much has changed, Montana had 300 total yards. So that'll tell you how much things have changed, because now it's kind of flipped. Montana used to be the team that was known for the really big physical lines. The Montana was the Montana boys was always the big thing. I think it still kind of is, but especially with the way I think Stitt and some of those other coaches kind of got them away from being the more physical teams. Certainly we saw it as NDSU and SDSU built up. But and then, obviously the last two, we know 2009, which we're going to get more into, I'm sure. But also we forget 2015, the most recent one, where SDSU went out there and really dug themselves a hole, but came back. And over the last half, they looked like the better team, but they were just they got down 24-0, outscored them 17-0 in the second half, but they just dug too deep a hole. I mean, that first half was god awful. And that was also the same year I mentioned that NDSU played Montana in that opener. And then, of course, the next week, the Grizz went out to Fargo and got destroyed. I don't think the Jackrabbits would have gone far that year. They probably would have gone to Fargo and gotten killed. That was Taryn's first playoff start. That was Dallas Goddard caught a touchdown in that game. It's pretty cold out there that day, too. It wasn't snowing or anything. But, and the only reason that they had to go to that game was because they blew their last game. It was kind of a weird blizzard thing. They got delayed going to Western Illinois. They lost to Bob Nielsen and Western Illinois on the final week of the season. They might have gotten a seed if they had beaten them. And because Coughlin Alumni was getting redone, they couldn't get a home game. I think they would have actually, if they got a seed, they would have played at Howard Wood Field, was what I was told. But
here's something interesting I'm noticing from that game that I just want to point out, because Montana's just, their fans and all that stuff, and it's crazy. That's an interesting number right there. That's pretty wild. Huh.
Well, to be fair, it's over Thanksgiving. So.
Huh.
It is over Thanksgiving,
I can hardly believe mine own eyes. I didn't think that was possible. Anyways, the Jacks came out so flat that game. It was terrible.
You got a true freshman playing in his first playoff game. I mean, it was just that was a strange year, because it started with an FBS win. Oh, granted, it was Kansas, who was terrible at that time, but it just that year was a transitional year. I mean, that was the year they just lost Zenner and Sumner, And the program isn't to the point it is now where it feels like, although we're going to see, because they're going to obviously have to reload pretty significantly with the guys they're losing, but I think we feel a little more comfortable in what they got coming back. But there was no, the stadium wasn't complete. It was half done at that point. The old Coughlin alumni stands were still on one end, but you had half the stadium done. I think the S-Jack was up at that point, but they didn't have the new stadium done. The S-Jack had only been there for a little bit. All these things had not been in place for very long. Now you've got all these things that people they've been recruiting with for years. Now you've got the national championships. Those were things, and it came into effect in 2009 because obviously after they lost that game, they missed the playoffs for 2 straight years. It took them 3 years to get back, but they've been on the run of playoffs ever since. There were those transitional years where you couldn't necessarily count on them reloading as quickly because the program was in a different place. I've kind of said that. I said that could be a challenge for USD if we're going to see if they're going to be able to sustain this moving forward. It takes time to kind of build that kind of depth in a program, and it took that time for SDSU, and now they're at that point that I think they will be. But that was a transitional year, and Montana jumped on them. Jack's made a good comeback, but just fell a little bit short. And it's been the story of the thing, though. Like I said, the series between them, even though the games are all spaced out quite a bit, they've all been close. So, they're due at least. And this will be the first time in more than 50 years the game has not been played in Missoula. So what's it going to be like? I mean, obviously there will be a lot of Grizz fans there. Let's not kid ourselves on that. That fan base is great. They haven't had a chance. The previous championship games they played in were, I think, in Chattanooga, if I'm not mistaken, which I've never been to Chattanooga, but, so I think they're going to enjoy going to Frisco for a new, aside from the fact they haven't been there in a long time. It's a new experience to go to Frisco. But, yeah, I think they're going to travel. They're going to be there, but this is going to be this is the first time they played SDSU where it's not 25,000 of their fans as opposed to maybe 1,000 or 2,000 SDSU fans. They're going to see a lot of SDSU blue in that stadium, and we'll see. I mean, we'll see. I mean, that's a different thing. And like I said, I would love to see. I would love to see them come to Brookings and get a home and home schedule, though. I think that would be great at some point, but I don't know if they're ever going to do that.
Stone, you have predicted big plays and secondaries and wide receivers running wild on the Jackrabbits all season, and here the Jackrabbits sit, just being pretty okay in the FCS when it comes to pass defense. Actually, I think if I look, they're like top 5 in the FCS passing defense or something like that. I don't know. Running wild. Nobody's run wild on SDSU yet in the secondary. So wake me up when that happens. But Stone doesn't say it. He likes us, but he wants SDSU to lose in the worst way. He does deep down inside, and that's okay. I love. Well, buddy.
He was a conference rival. He played one of the best playoff games I've ever seen at Dana J. That quarterfinal in the COVID year was truly one of the best games I've ever been. It's a shame it was the COVID year because it would have been nice if more people could have showed up for it. We had the attendance limits that year. That game was just bonkers. That was a fun game. So, I to the point I've heard some people saying, and it will become a factor if SDSU keeps winning and, has anything close to what NDSU has done in terms of just winning titles and titles on top of titles. But, there will be some fatigue of people if you keep going to these games where you're going to blow people out, but I even though they're hard to take if you're a fan, it is more fun when you have those games like you had with SIU a couple of years ago, or where it's just where there's a little more drama, or when it's a Montana State or a Montana if they were coming to town. Those are the ones that you really get up for. And last night was obviously a different deal too. But yeah, I mean, if we don't start seeing a little more some of these FCS programs rise, which is why I say I hope Albany, I hope a lot of these programs start, even the ones within the Valley. I hope there starts to be more teams that can get competitive because, man, I think it would be those playoff games are the most fun. The blowouts have their moments too, but they do get old if you don't feel like teams can come in and compete. And I really don't. I really didn't feel like any of the. I didn't feel like Mercer was going to compete, and I really didn't feel like Albany was going to hang in this game. I thought they were a nice story, but I just didn't feel like it was going to be more than a quarter or two.
Am I missing Montana on here? Did I just zip by them? SDSU is number 7 in yards allowed per game, which is
You're having fun with this tonight, man.
I'm enjoying
right.
this.
And John, right? I know they've never been to Frisco. They haven't been to the national title game since 2009. The Frisco thing started, I think, in like 11. Before that, it was in Chattanooga. I think it was in Chattanooga, if I'm not mistaken. So their run of going to national title games stopped right at the time it was basically moving to Frisco. So yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, their fans have been waiting a while to go to a title game, period. So like I said, they're going to be it could be in Alaska, and they're probably going to show up in big numbers. But yeah, I think they're undefeated in Frisco. But last I checked, Bobby Hawk is winless in national title games.
I wasn't going to bring it up, but I was going to say, boy,
I mean, if you're going to keep bringing it up,
great at making national titles.
If you're going to keep bringing up the 2009 and the all-time series record, the only guy the guys who won you, there's a ex-guy I've seen around here, Joe Glenn. He ain't walking on that sideline for you, So something's going to give in this game on January 7th. Either SDSU's finally going to beat Montana, or Bobby Hawk's going to get the monkey off his back, and we'll see. It's interesting. Yeah, ironically, their last national title game loss, I think, was to Villanova in 2009. It was Matt Caesar. I remember because I came out there the next year. I believe the guy's name was Matt Caesar, and they called it Pizza Guy because it sounded like the pizza joint Caesar. He was like this guy named Caesar, and he killed him that day. But I can't believe that team to this day didn't win the national title, because that, of course, we've heard Mark Mariani's name, but they had Chase Reynolds, who was one of the all-time great backs in Division I. That team should have won a title. I don't know. I'll have to look back now at their archives and see what the heck was going on, but especially after you win that game against SDSU, where we I guess we'll have to broach this because I don't know what our post game is going to look like in a few weeks.
Right.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there after the holidays, I guess. But eventually we might as well broach the topic of what happened in 2009 at some point. But how you have just that unbelievable kind of, well, of course I said this with the Vikings back in 2017 when they had the miracle at the Minneapolis, and then they promptly went out the next week and got smashed at the NFC title game. But how you have that kind of a miraculous comeback win and you don't finish the thing, and then they obviously beat SDSU in that playoff game. They beat Stephen F. Austin 51-0 the next week. Got Appalachian State the following week, and this was when might have been App State's one of their last real playoff games in the. I'm not sure, was App State maybe the defending champ, 3-time defending champ at that point? They might have been. I don't know. But they beat App State
was there for a while yet because Georgia Southern had a bunch of games up in Fargo.
Well, at this point, remember, NDSU and SDSU weren't really players yet. NDSU was 6-5. This was the first that was SDSU's first ever playoff appearance, which again makes it kind of ironic that we're coming back here to potentially maybe their best team ever could win their. Again, we talk about the narratives thing. This is one more narrative for this senior class to slay. But then they beat Appalachian State, go out to Villanova, which was in Chattanooga, and lose 23-21. Give up they were this guy Matt, and they always had good receivers. Like I said, they've always had guys like they had a really good receiver named Jabin. They had 2 unbelievable receivers in Mariani and Zambrano. Mariani was a Pro Bowler the next year as a rookie. Like that team, I'm not saying they were like SDSU level of, and the FCS was not quite as watered down as it is now. So it was a little more. It was, don't get me wrong. That's another thing I would love to see how this team have done in those eras against like App States and whatnot. But there's no way that team should have. Yeah, in that game, they gave up one guy went for 4 catches, 68 yards, and then ran for 14 and 159. So they got just pummeled in that one. But yeah, I mean, it's the final ghost, as John is saying, the final ghost, which we will now get to, was
it's really the last demon that SDSU football can vanquish, because James Madison left. Otherwise, there would have been maybe the Sam Houston vengeance and James Madison. They're both gone, so you can't do that. So the last thing left, because it was the narrative of winning, playing well in the Dakota Dome, beating NDSU in the playoffs, beating NDSU, not having the letdown game, all those are gone. Those are all gone. The last one is beating Montana. And I would have preferred if it was in Brookings, because that'd have been a lot of fun. But this is really the last one left for this class to take care of.
Yep. And then I might as well just rip the Band-Aid off for you Jackrabbit fans. I was working in Fargo actually at the time again, and somehow I was getting WNAX up there. It was kind of funny. I don't know how it reached that.
Yeah, you can get WNAX up to Fargo, damn near into Fargo a little ways.
I think it was Immel. What was his name? Immel. It wasn't Tyler, obviously, at that point. Steve Immel. Emming was his name. He obviously, it's been Tyler ever since I got out here in 2013. But I heard them get up really big in that game. Obviously, they led. They got out to the 17-0 lead. Montana gets a couple touchdowns, gets back to within 3, but then the Jacks take a 34-14 lead at half. It's 41-21 in the third quarter, 48-21 in the third quarter, and then Mark Mariani starts to go nuts, takes a kickoff back 98, catches a 15-yard touchdown. Chase Reynolds gets in a couple of 1-yard runs. Mariani with another touchdown catch, and then there was an interception return, and what you had was a 34-point fourth quarter. And I remember I heard the start of that game. I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty good, And again, at this point, SDSU was kind of I'm NDSU coverage, so I'm like, oh, this is good showing for SDSU. They're really doing it, And then I was shooting a bunch of other stuff, doing shows, and I come back and they're talking like the world had come to an end, and I couldn't figure it out. And I'm like, they lost. And then sure enough, I come back and then I'm seeing it on ESPN, and I'm like, Jesus. Yeah, that was just to go from the ultimate high of you made your first playoff. You look like you absolutely belong in the moment. Because, I mean, one thing to make your first playoff, but you're going to what at the time was the unquestioned, they were the NDSU before NDSU at this point. Somebody even asked me how NDSU, how did they become the Death Star? There's a lot of reasons for that. Big reason you can thank Tim Brewster for being a total terrible hire at Minnesota and letting every good player in the Twin Cities go to Fargo. But yeah, I mean, no, I've never worked in Chattanooga. I know it's a night. I'm not blasting Chattanooga, but when you have it in the same, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Frisco, everybody, I've never heard a bad review about Frisco. People seem to like it. Chattanooga's nice.
Kevin, I know, because you're all mad about SoCon disrespect and everything. I'm going to give the SoCon props. They were in the semifinals twice today with the SoCon officiating crew, and they did the coin toss with the SoCon coin. So I'll give you props on that.
Hey, in all seriousness, the conference is probably moving in the right direction. I think the CAA is obviously – the CAA at least had a pretty good showing with Villanova and Albany, but – it's moving in a better direction, but at some point you got to get to a semifinal, and if you want better seeding, you got to get to a semifinal. It isn't just that you always get your champion always gets sent to Fargo. There have been chances to win quarterfinal games on the road that for whatever reason it just didn't happen. And again, you had the chance to beat a 1-9 team. They're probably in the semifinal. It might have been SDSU. It might well have been SDSU and Furman today, or last night, if they had beaten Wofford. Probably would have been.
Well, and here's the thing.
Probably would, because it would have been because Furman would have been. I think they would have been the 4th seed. I think they would have been the 4th. Idaho, again, no disrespect to Eck, they had 3 losses. I think it would have been I think you would have still had SDSU, Montana, USD. Contrary to what that one guy I went back and forth with was trying to show me the mathematical model of why Furman should be number one. Yeah, Furman would have been the 4th seed easily if they were one loss, and then maybe they are playing at SDSU the other night. And I think SDSU is going to be just about any team they play, but they probably would have given them a better game than Albany. I feel like that would have been. I feel like they would have given SDSU, and I'm not saying they would have won or taken it to the wire, but I think they would have been more competitive with SDSU than probably Albany and maybe even Idaho at this point. So there, do you feel like I've been nice enough to the SoCon now? Don't blow it against a 1-9 team that's basically Western Illinois.
Right. Jeez. Well, here's my thing. Road teams don't win very extremely rarely in the semifinals. They can win in the quarterfinals. It happens with regularity. And that's part of why it was so important from an SDSU fan perspective of the dynasty's not, NDSU is not dead until the head's cut off and the body's burned, was making them go on the road. Right. And, they absolutely had a hell of a run. I'm not taking away from that, but that's why it was so important to have them on the road. These type of games, when they're this close, usually the road team loses, especially in the semifinals. Even if the crowd's not packed, because not everywhere's Montana. If the crowd's not packed, it's still nuts because it's a semifinal. Everywhere you go, and the home team wins in the semifinals. That's the last time one loss was 2016. So that makes 14 semifinals with no road teams winning. So it's hugely important. And NDSU,
if I'm not mistaken, that took double over. I think that took double overtime too. That was Youngstown, I think, up at Eastern.
Right.
So it's like that didn't exactly that could well have gone the other way too. So yeah, it's home field matters. We've seen that with SDSU. They had, tell me the Dallas Goddard, Christian Winnicky teams could have gone to a title game that they were on the road. They figured out you get home field, your chances to go to the title game skyrocket.
So yeah, and that's why it was so huge, because yes, you'll escape sometimes on an overtime game like they did with Montana State and you'll win. It's just when you get into that many overtime games in a row on the road, eventually a ball's not going to bounce your way. A call's not going to go your way, like Brian's talking about. We can get into that for a quick second. But otherwise, yeah. So otherwise, yeah, that's why it was so important for them to be on the road. Brian, on the PI on the 2-point conversion, I'm going to be honest. When I rewatch that, it's one of those plays where the tight end starts blocking and then tries to separate. They get tangled up and he falls down. It wasn't that egregious. I know with green and yellow glasses, it's the end of the world, and it was a terrible call. If it was SDSU, I'd be screaming that it was a terrible call too. But what I'm looking at, and when you see it on replay, he engages, he tries to throw him off, and then he trips going by him. That's what it looks like to me. On 2-point conversions, they don't blow whistles they don't throw flags very often anyways. So I'm not shocked that didn't get called. So that's just my take on it. I don't know if you saw, Borg, what your take on that is. But honestly, when it comes down to it with officials in that game, were there missed calls? Absolutely. But you know what? Cam Miller missed 4 or 5 bombs that should have been touchdowns. NDSU called the dumbest 2-point conversion play I've ever seen, which takes precedent over any sort of officiating call that could have been made. You were running the power with your quarterback and the running back, and they weren't getting touched for 5 yards before they got touched, and then they were getting 8 to 10 yards. Run the damn ball and don't be cute. Don't try to be too smart. I have no sympathy for the officials. It's not officials. I don't want to hear about officials. It's just, there were bad calls. Absolutely. There was a big hold immediately in the game. I'm like, that's a hold. But in the end, when it's that close of a game, they made crucial mistake and missed plays, didn't make plays, dropped balls. They had 4 or 5 dropped balls that would have extended drives.
Huge. They had a
hit them in the chest.
Yeah, huge. Like, God, yeah, that was unbelievable. A few of them. Also, shout out, I see Mark Gronowski's brother, that Ryan on here.
Ryan?
So, yeah,
no.
Ryan
Oh, it is Ryan.
Yeah, there
Hey,
we go.
buddy, what's shaking,
Welcome
bud?
aboard.
Oh my
Congrats to you.
God, you're still
Congrats to you
awake.
and your family, man.
You animal, you're still awake. That's awesome.
Congrats to you guys. I know there's still a lot of work to be done, but I hope you guys are, you and Mark are enjoying the holiday season this week.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to get as technical. I was actually driving to go shoot Augustana doubleheader with SMSU, so I hated leaving because I left right after they had hit the 2-point conversion on that wild play, but I had it in the car. So then I eventually saw the play, and I'm like, one other thing, I'm not going to get as technical in it, but I think this is part of it. Like I'm not necessarily excusing it. First of all, refs are always going to miss calls. You can't.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm saying this is a Chiefs fan who just had his team kind of get waxed about the whole crybaby thing, but you want consistency at the very least. Do you feel like they were mostly consistent? I think it was a good no call. I think the other thing that kind of gets interesting too is when you see a team like the Bison and when a team runs the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and then they suddenly run some weird ass trick thing, I think it throws the refs off a little bit too. Like if you've seen the same power, and then all of a sudden, hey, we're going to be the St. Louis, we're going to be the greatest show on turf, and then you all of a sudden have to start looking for a different formation. Maybe you just don't catch what you normally would. Again, maybe that's another point where you're like they're outsmarting themselves. You ran a play that was so you had to be the smartest guy in the room to the point that you probably took the referees out of their normal element. And maybe they didn't see what they normally would have. Maybe they call that if they're in a better position. It just was such an atypical and unnecessary when they had just run the ball down their throat to get into the end zone. I mean, we just said this with Lujan. You gotta go with what got you there.
Good at.
Go with what got you there. Do not. Yeah, Montana, they did that. They did the trick play and they got a little lucky that it got caught off the tip, but that's a little more their game. That they do stuff like that. That's not NDSU. Their power. They're always been the big physical offensive line. So no, I don't really. That was my thing. I saw that and I'm like, you don't get sympathy. There are two things you do not get sympathy for in this game. You punted to Junior Bergen. You had one.
Right.
That had to be the number one thing on your. And you were punting from your own end zone. It'd be one thing if maybe you were maybe I punted at the 20-yard line. He fielded at the 5, made 8 guys miss, and goes, okay, maybe then I get it. He's just that good. You punted from your own end zone. It was only a 47-yard return. Yeah. There's literally one thing you have to do, and it's not punt to that guy. And you did it in the most important moment of the game. You're lucky. For one thing, you are damn lucky it wasn't an 8-point game. You're lucky their kicker sucks, and you had a chance to come back, and it wasn't as hard to tie the game as it should have been. So that was number one stupid thing. Number two stupid thing, and I'm placing that mostly on the coaching staff. I don't like to make it sound like I'm coming down hard on kids because these aren't pro players. They make mistakes. Like the coaching staff, if somebody just accidentally punted it to him, that's it. Like if the coaching staff wasn't telling that guy to punt it out of bounds, then that's on them. The number two stupid thing is the play call. You just don't do that. You run something that you're comfortable with. And not only that, why is the wide receiver throwing that ball? Why isn't it Cam Miller? Why isn't it the guy you've been pumping the tires for who should be a Walter Payton guy, most accurate passer, this, that? Legitimately, I think he took a big step forward. Why don't you even let Cole Payton throw the ball? Why with your season on the line, is a guy who I don't even know if Rajah Nelson's thrown a football this year. Why is he throwing that ball?
Right.
It's just mind-numbingly stupid, and especially from a guy who, obviously we'll see now. I don't think Tyler Roll is getting that head coaching job. I think if he were getting it, they would have named him within. Maybe I'm wrong.
Right.
I think they would have named him.
I agree.
Sooner. But especially when you want to show, if you're trying to show you're going to be the head coach, that's not good. He called a pretty good game to get him back in it in the fourth quarter, but geez, that's just, man alive. That's a brutal way to go out to lose a game to lose it not being who you are.
Yeah, and I want to be very clear. Brian, for sure, when Brian and I message each other all the time, he was not he complained about that play, but he talked about all the other things that they were deficient in and agreed on all that. I'm just, as a general to the universe of NDSU fans or fans in general that were upset with the officiating, there was a lot of chances for them to win that game. And like you said, I fully agree with, I don't think they're hiring Tyler Roll, because at this point, if they do hire Tyler Roll at this point, it's actually worse. And it's not, I don't have much of an opinion.
It's gonna be an awkward press conference.
I'm not gonna have an opinion on them, on who they should hire or anything like that. But it would be dumb to wait this long for no apparent reason to announce him. And they're losing recruits right now and hemorrhaging them. And then you got the transfer portal on top of that. And you got Entz leaving. Now he's got time for guys if he wants to bring them with. Because let's be honest, USC, part of the reason Lincoln Riley hires this guy, in my opinion, is you want someone who has his act together in the Midwest for that style of player, because you're going to the Big Ten. And who fits that sort of mold for guys who could come in? NDSU players. I can't believe they've got to announce that. And if I'm NDSU, I'm a little concerned, unless it's somebody who's an outside hire. If you end up hiring Tyler Roll, it's a huge, gigantic mistake to have waited this long to announce it, and honestly, borderline irresponsible.
Well, I think one other thing too that's kind of interesting. You mentioned that, and when we've seen that too. I mean, the Craig Bowl departure was really messy, because I heard he was still coaching there technically, and he was offering people as he was taking them. The Bowl thing was, I think he was still offering recruits while he was still technically the NDSU coach to go to Wyoming, is what I've heard. Right. But I think the one difference with the Entz thing is I don't think he would, against you, other than the fact USC is USC. I think you'd probably, if there were to be transfers from NDSU, it'd probably be defensive guys, maybe linebackers, because obviously that's where he's going to be a linebackers coach. So I don't know who on that offense right now. Cam's nice, but he's not going to be the starting quarterback at USC, needless to say. Maybe you could get some defensive transfers, but no, the point is very solid. And this is a different era. I mean, look, I don't think Bison football is ever going to fall back to being 3-9 the way they were in 2009 when I was there. But you're in the NIL era, you're in the transfer portal era. You do need a coach with connections. You need, that's one area where SDSU, I think, is aside. We've also talked about the player development. It's one area where they've really worked the Bison over. Bison don't really get great transfers. It's like they complain and they whine and they moan. Oh, the portal is killing us. I've seen Jason Freeman come here out of the NAIA. Brian Williams came here out of Division II. Mm-hmm. John O'Brien came from Bowling Green. Isaiah Stallberg was a special teamer at Nebraska. I mean, my SDSU, they found guys. The portal does work both ways. And I get that, your first preference is always going to be, we want to get a high school guy that we develop and get him for 4 or 5 years, whatever. That's always your first preference. That's also changing now because of this NIL thing, where if a program can offer you money and you don't have you don't have to sit that year, you can't necessarily even count on that anymore, having a 4-year thing. So
yeah,
I think that's been a problem with Entz. I don't know that he's done a great job. And even he kind of admitted this when he had his press conference. He said, yeah, Oladoka, he came from Samford. He was and that was a situation where they had to have him because obviously Gronowski had just had that freak thing in the title game. They got him out of Samford, and he was terrific. Again, Matthew, we're talking everything in general. How much more can we talk about that SDSU 59-0 win? But no. So, but where, like Entz kind of said, he's never had FBS experience. He clearly wants to be an FBS coach, maybe a head coach. And so obviously I've even heard that he's probably turned down an opportunity or two, maybe at a smaller level FBS school. So he's kind of betting on himself. Now, King Frazier is a good one. That's one we forget about. They did have, but that was a Kleiman guy. I think that was a Kleiman guy. So that was kind of pre-portal era too. That was a different it's just, I don't know. They have not. Now, to my original point, you bring in Roll. Again, I like the guy. He was a hell of a player. He's Bison through and through. He is a West Fargo native. His only other experience is coaching at a high school there. I think I've heard them say he applied for the East Tennessee State job, head coaching job. Obviously, did not get that. Man, that's,
I mean, to be
that's
fair,
a lot. That's a lot to put on a guy who's never had any real head coach, who doesn't have much coaching experience. Period. Kleiman, Ince, Bowl, they had all been coaching in the business in some level for a while. Tyler's just been at NDSU for a while now. He's never been outside of Fargo. You know, that's why I don't think he's getting it. And there was that groundswell they had the other day where a bunch of the players came out, I think on Tuesday, and they were the Roll Herd tweet. Cam Miller came out and said, we need to, make this guy the head coach. That's not uncommon. You see players want to support their assistant, but makes me kind of wonder if maybe they were starting to realize that this maybe isn't going his way. We need to get behind him now, type thing. Right. So I'll end it over to you for that.
No, for me, I think what ended up happening, and it was great for a long time, is they leaned too much into we don't take portal players. I remember against Jacksonville State, they're just a transfer team, and that's good, but they went kind of too far, so that now when this day and age happens, it makes it difficult. So that's just my quick deal on it. Let's talk more SDSU, guys. I mean, at this point, I'm probably going to go to bed. I don't know what else you want us to talk about now. We have six more shows to go. Just on Jackrabbit Illustrated, we've got 6 more shows to go before Frisco. We will be.
We spent like an hour talking about it before this, too. By the way, we've been on the air now for an hour and a half, so it's not like we didn't.
Sorry, there'll be 9. Yeah, there's going to be 6 to 9 shows leading up to this Montana State game because there's 3 weeks until the game, and plus all the coverage. Zach's going to do all this stuff. Let's be honest.
I do want to have
this
some fun,
NDSU thing is pertinent for a lot of levels to us. But that being said, I do want to put out there, allegedly, if you're looking for tickets. And we don't put stuff out unless we're pretty sure about it. The SDSU is going to have the same home side or the same side in the stadium. So just throwing that out there. We are working with the local on some things. We'll get to that and everything. We'll announce things when those plans get a little more firm. I know they are more ready for SDSU fans, and I don't mean the more ready like they said on Saturday during the day before Saturday night when they thought they were more ready and they weren't. They're genuinely more ready. This is an interesting question from Juice Master. What's the SDSU coaching tree look like? It is quietly one of the largest coaching trees in the country. If you
and growing,
look at Coach Stig, and growing. You've got Vanderbilt. These is Coach. God, no, I can't remember anybody's name off the top.
I'll see if I can look it up. Obviously, the ones that come off the top of the head. Obviously, Eck is the easy one right now at Idaho.
Yeah.
In Division II, Brian Bergstrom, who was the co-defensive coordinator with Jimmy Rogers, he's the head coach at Winona State. Got them to the playoffs his first year. I'll look up I know SDSU there was an assistant last year. I think he was the running backs, the D-line coach who went with David Braun to Northwestern. Yep. We were definitely kind of worried about his job after the Fitzgerald thing. I would imagine he's pretty safe now if he wants to stay there and should continue assistant. I want to say maybe it was Dan Jackson is what we're thinking of. Was it Dan Jackson at Vanderbilt? I think. So yeah, there's
Dickert.
Dickert. Jake Dickert was a former SDSU assistant. I mean, it's
for a long time I've wanted somebody in because I'd like to, but life and another full-time job gets in the way. But if somebody went through and looked at the John Stiegelmeier coaching tree, I think it would blow some people's socks off. It really would. Because did DeBoer No.
No, I
He
don't think
wasn't
he
a
did.
GA or
He was
anything. No.
no, he was pretty much a USF guy through and through. Obviously
Yeah.
worked. The other thing people
Right.
kind of forget too is we talk about these coaching trees. It's so hard to even. A lot of the times, a lot of these guys who get up to D1, they're just they knew somebody. They were,
Right.
sometimes they're just, I guess the new term is the nepo babies or whatever. It like what DeBoer has done is just remarkable because there's not a lot of NAI guys who actually, here's a name. We got a lot of Montana guys on here. Guys,
Northern Illinois.
Here's another one that Montana guys will remember: Van Diest, Mike Van Diest, because for years he was killing it at Carroll College in nearby there. And anytime the Montana or Montana State job was open, his name was like everybody. He was one of the first names that always popped up because, like, well, he's killing it here. Why don't we bring him over? Now, I don't know if there was more to that. There, for all I know, there was. But it's just so hard for those guys to rise up the ranks, just because you're having success at that level. And what DeBoer did, obviously, he was damn near undefeated at USF. I think he lost like 3 games all time, whatever. He eventually figured out, okay, if I really want to get to FBS, I'm going to have to go the assistant route. Was an assistant in a bunch of places, climbed the ladder, offensive coordinator like Fresno. Then he goes to Indiana and eventually gets his job at Indiana. Finally got the head coaching job at Fresno State. But it was a long trek up the ladder for him. And a lot of guys don't get to that level. It's just not that easy. There are a lot of great coaches out there now. I mean, shoot, look at what the guy at Northwestern down here in Orange City is doing. They're going for their 2nd straight national title. He's young. I would think, maybe in another year or two, if SDSU needs a defensive coordinator down the road, I would look down there at him with what he's doing at Northwestern. But
right.
Yeah, you just don't. Yeah, it's tough for coaches to move up the ranks in college football. So anytime you have a coaching tree like what Stig's done, it's pretty remarkable. Even if they're not necessarily head coaches yet, it's pretty wrong. Yeah, Van Diest was tremendous. Carroll and USF. Again, you want to talk about, they were the powers. I mean, they met a lot, I think, for national titles. If they hadn't played each other, they would have been. Yeah, those were salad days back in the day for those programs. But
right.
Yeah, but anytime, that was always a thing. Like anytime, it was usually the Montana State job. Obviously, Montana, they were so successful. I mean, the only time that job ever came open was when Joe Glenn left for Wyoming, and then obviously Bobby Hawk left for Montana or left for UNLV, which was a horrible career decision on his part.
It's a bold choice.
Yeah. Well, I obviously loved Las Vegas, but worked out well for him. I do want to mention, by the way, since we got the Montana guy on here, we want some fun numbers. Here's some fun numbers. I mentioned 23-21 Villanova. Here's another one. 24-7 against Richmond, 2008. 31-21 against James Madison in 2004. I'm reading off the national championship scores for Bobby in the national championship games. All losses.
He's mad. He heard you. He got it.
Oh yeah, the savior who has yet to win a national title. It's like, we get it. And I think you mentioned this earlier, though. In all seriousness, I've said this to SDSU fans: don't get too cocky. My retort is, whether it's been like with with like this week, they're thinking, oh, we're gonna go roll Montana, or I've said it at times with like the USD things or anything. If people are looking too far ahead, the worst thing you can do is be a Bison fan and get arrogant and think everything is given. We're God's gift to football. Just like Stig would say, stay humble. Nothing is given. Just enjoy this ride. It doesn't last forever. Anybody can beat anybody on a given day. And yeah, I think absolutely Montana has every reason to. Montana they matched up enough physically with NDSU for all the mistakes they did. There is reason to think they can match up somewhat with SDSU. I think the X factor that's going to be the thing there, like I said, I don't think SDSU's faced a player like Junior Bergen. I'm really certain Montana has not seen anything like Isaiah Davis. Because I think if NDSU had that big bruising running back they've usually had in the past, their offensive line, I think, was getting the holes. I think they were getting enough penetration. They were blowing Montana off the ball in periods, but they didn't have anybody who was wearing Montana down. Isaiah Davis is a guy who can wear that team down and is going to. I think that's where, if it is a close game, that's going to be the difference. That NDSU just didn't have that finisher that Davis can be. The offensive line, we know with SDSU is great, but Davis is that guy who's going to run you over, and he's going to, he can get the ball 20 some times if they need to, and I think that will tire Montana. I think he's just going to beat them down at some point. So I think that's Bergen can hit you with the big hitters, but I think over time Davis is the one who wears you down in that game. That's where I think it's going to be ultimately there. But we'll see. I think it'll be I'm just, like I said, I'm enthused. It's something different for sure.
I love stuff like this from fans of any team. Because, I mean, okay, let's say relevancy 20-16 SDSU over Montana State at home. SDSU isn't known to dominate any Montana team. Well,
what do you call the semifinal last year?
Let's say relevancy. Let's do a more recent version. NDSU in Brookings. That sure didn't need double overtime. So
NDSU in the title game last year didn't even barely even needed 3/4.
Let's use the transitive property that never works. I'll go into the circle of suck, and there's actually a website called the Circle of Suck, and you can use the transitive property to show how anybody can beat anybody. You go have fun with that, and then you'll be able to justify whatever thing you want on there. But anyway,
I mean, hey, seriously though, this is great. This is fun. It's fun.
This is what it's all about, baby.
Yeah, I mean, look. This is. I mean, we have the same stuff with Montana State, which I'm sure they appreciate because I know how much they hate Montana State. It's 24/7, 365. I wish we had this kind of level at this state too. Quite frankly,
I don't know. They say they hate Montana State so much, but I see more Montana State and Montana fans saying, "I'm cheering for the Montana team." You don't see that nearly as much. You sure as hell don't see it.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't believe for once. I don't believe for 1 second.
A dozen of them.
I don't believe for 1 second there was a Grizz fan cheering for the Bobcats last year.
I saw it on the Facebook FCS Fans Nation page multiple
man,
times.
I do not believe that at all, man. Especially the Bobcats. Like Bobcats, they've had their last, other than SDSU, I think they've had 4 of their last 5 years ended by the Bison. How are the Bobcats feeling right now? They had worked so hard to finally beat North Dakota State, and it was all there for them, and they blew it. And now they just watched them go to Montana, and Montana got it done. It's just, there is no way the Bobcats are rooting. Most of them. There's always exceptions to everything in life. The time I was there ain't no way that there was a Bobcat. Most of those Bobcat fans are like, I'll be happy if the Grizz win it for our conference because it's good for our conference. It's good for our state. No,
I hate that attitude. I hate that attitude.
It's going to be hell for them if they have to. It's already hell for them because they got their butt whooped in the Brawl of the Wild. They had a team that they thought could at least get to a semifinal or a quarterfinal. They got bounced in the first. They got bounced at home, and then the team that bounced them got bounced by the Grizz, and then you're telling me if they go beat SDSU, the team that you lost to in the semifinals a year ago, potentially cost you a national title.
Oh yeah,
you lost to earlier this. But we're happy for the conference. Bull. You are not Idaho. You are not Eastern Washington. You're not some other member of the conference. You're Montana State. And if you were Montana and the shoe was on the other foot and it were the Bobcats playing the Jackrabbits, you ain't rooting for the Bobcats to beat the Jackrabbits in the national title game. You just ain't.
Yep.
So I mean that rivalry. I only got to do one. I only got to do one Brawl of the Wild in 2010. It was brutally cold in Missoula. It was like the kind of cold we had last week in Villanova, but worse. It was worse. That rivalry is just something else. It should be a bucket list for anybody to go to it and experience it because man, they are. It's 24/7. As great as the NDSU SDSU one is, you can't top the hate and the 365 level that is. So, yeah, I mean, I will not buy for 1 second that you tell me the Jackrabbit fans I can't imagine Jackrabbit fans would have rooted for the Coyotes if somehow the Coyotes were playing against Montana in this title game. So don't tell me in that rivalry series it's going to go the other way. No. So I think I don't know where we were before that, but yeah. And I don't. Yeah. I hate that argument too. You have to root for your rival because they're. No, I don't. Hell no. I root for. That applies to the pros. That applies to college. If I were my high school alma mater, I'm like, I'm rooting for them. I don't care. I mean, yeah, it's kind of neat to see. Yeah, great. Someone from my neck of the woods won a title, but it wasn't my team. I don't freaking care. I don't want to see my rival win a title. Are you nuts?
No, it's not. I that's why I saw that. I've seen it before. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's insane. Like, I would never do that.
I mean, the best thing it does for you is it maybe gives you some seat. It gives you pull in the playoff seeding and stuff. Go back to our SoCon friend. The reason you would never have been the number 2 seed this year is because the Big Sky and the Missouri Valley have earned their place to get that kind of seeding because they're always in the semifinals or always into the championship. When you can say when your teams are at least getting that successful, then it does kind of help your standing overall as a conference. But it's not enough to make me want to go root for a Bison championship or whatever if I'm a South Dakota fan of any South Dakota or a South Dakota State fan. So no, there's no. There will be if you go to Bozeman, I think there will be a lot of South Dakota State cheering parties for the first time this year on January 7th. If I had to guess, that's
a tough pill for Montana State because all right, you got
to Fargo. I would love that.
Oh my God, that'd be insane.
I was even hearing some weird rumor about Tim Brewster too. That would be even funnier.
Oh God, that'd be incredible. I'm gonna be honest with you, Zach. I gotta go to bed at this point.
I don't blame you. I gotta finish up some stuff too, man. It's been this is actually about as crazy as the selection show. Who knew we'd have this many people up at we'll let you know.
Look at all you degenerates. I love you guys. Thanks for showing up.
Hope
Even
so, yeah.
you, CB, you sensitive little one, you.
Yeah, but check out Jackrabbit Illustrated for you guys. If you didn't think we talked enough SDSU or you missed the first hour. And yeah, I saw that with Heckendorf too. That's a name that's kind of come out of left field. I think he had a brother or a cousin who played for SDSU, but yeah, I think who needs sleep? Well, if you have a newborn, you don't get sleep, but
right.
And actually it was funny because we said I thought about doing this earlier with you, but you had a thing with your wife, and I thought mine was going to be back in town, but she's back with her family. So I'm like, well, screw that.
No,
great.
Kidding.
So now I don't have anybody at home. Keep up with Jackrabbit Illustrated. You guys are going to you got 3 weeks to pump out a lot of content. As do we at Dakota News Now. And again, check out a lot of the stuff. I've got something that's going to be going live here in a few minutes. Had some great reaction with Garrett Greenfield, Lamar Johnson, Jimmy. Had some really great shots last night that our photographers got. We were allowed to, obviously, the celebration.
With him and with Jimmy and the kids and his wife, that was awesome.
Yeah, that was fun. Some really good fan shots. There were 2 little kids playing a fiddle in the stands. Yep. There was I got a good shot of I think Daishan he was bawling, I think, when he gave Jimmy a hug. I didn't catch the trivia that Brian's referring to there.
It was there's something along the lines of the first undrafted rookie to start for an NFL team. What was his name and what college did he go to?
I'm guessing he must be an SDSU guy. If you're on there, it's been a while, but he must be an SDSU guy if you're asking me this.
Well, Brian is an NDSU guy.
He's an NDSU guy. Okay.
College, and if he says college, I mean, you got to go way back for a college, unless he means. I'm not sure how specific he's being. Mike Vaughn for Carroll. Mike Van.
It was Mike Van Diest. What's his name? Yeah. Mike Van. Oh, that was the guy? That was the first?
Apparently.
Wow. Huh. That's a really cool trivia question. Good job with that, Brian. Holy crap. That's wow. Yeah, I don't know. That guy, I don't know what happened to him. Obviously, I lost touch. you ever want a great thing, you ever want a great, and I know you're going to go to bed. If you want to get a good laugh tonight, folks, look up, I think his name is Bob Green. He used to be the Montana Tech.
Yes, I've
NAI
seen him. He's hilarious.
Look up his sound bites. You will be laughing. You want something great coming from Montana. That guy was an American treasure, and I wish we had more head coaches like him. But he has plenty of stuff that is out on the internet, and if you want to get a really good laugh tonight, check that out. That dude was something else. But yeah, and we'll like I said, we'll figure out. I have no clue what the post game show will look like on January 7th. We'll see where we all are. Maybe we'll figure that out in time. But no shortage of good stuff coming, guys. So, and either way, since this will be the last one in 2023, 2023 year.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. This was, I think when I approached you with this earlier this year, I thought this could be pretty fun and something that might have a good reaction, and I think it took off pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great. So
I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it with the other fans too, not just the SDS. I mean, we talked a lot of SDSU, but obviously that's the main one that we start off with and do the most of. But I've enjoyed it with the other fans too. It's just been fun to see. I think you've seen there is the passion for the FCS here. It's probably one of the only shows that's on a post game. It's fun to see just the other fan bases. That's why it was fun to talk the other schools around here as well. So thanks to everybody who came on and joined, and hope you enjoyed it this year. And like I said, we'll see what 2024 looks like in the title game here in a few weeks.
Hell yeah! And with that, we will see you guys after the national title.
Happy holidays.